I had always believed that the world would make sense once I stepped back through that front door. After a grueling 48-hour shift, the cold winter air had never felt so soothing, and the thought of seeing my son, Ben, and my wife, Ava, made my weary body feel lighter. The endless rush of life-saving decisions, the chaos of emergency calls, and the unrelenting pressure of my job had drained me, but all that mattered now was going home. Home to them. I turned onto our street, the familiar houses lining the road, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself smile. The exhaustion from my job was a constant weight on my shoulders, but it was the only way I knew how to provide for my family. As I pulled into the driveway of our modest home, I couldn't help but feel that small flicker of hope. This was my sanctuary, my place to rest, where everything was supposed to make sense. The silence in the house greeted me immediately, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a heavy fog. No laughter from Ben, no sounds of Ava moving around the house. It was too quiet, too still. I shook it off, assuming that Ava must be in the kitchen, preparing something for dinner. But as I stepped inside, the unease grew. I called out to them. Ava? Ben? Nothing. I set down my bag by the door, my footsteps echoing in the hollow space of the house. My heart began to pound, though I couldn't quite place why. It was a feeling I couldn't shake off. Something was wrong. The house didn't feel like home. It felt foreign, like a place I didn't belong. I moved through the house, calling their names again, but all I could hear was the thudding of my own heartbeat. My instincts, honed over years of emergency calls, kicked in. I was on alert now. Something wasn't right. And then I reached our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and I could hear faint rustling from inside. I pushed it open, and there she was. Ava, my wife, my everything. She was standing by the suitcase, her back to me, folding clothes into it with an almost mechanical precision. Her movements were cold, deliberate. Ava, I whispered, my voice shaking. What's going on? She turned slowly, her face expressionless. I saw something in her eyes, something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something far worse, something that made my chest tighten. I didn't expect you home so early, she said, her voice steady but lacking warmth. I blinked, trying to process her words. Are you leaving? I gestured to the suitcase. She took a deep breath and met my eyes, her gaze unwavering. I'm leaving you, Max. I felt the ground beneath me shift. My head spun as I tried to grasp what she was saying. What? What are you talking about? It's over, Max, she continued, her words cutting through me like a knife. I can't do this anymore. I've met someone else, someone who can give me what you never could. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. I had always known our marriage had its challenges, but I never imagined it would come to this. Not like this. Not with someone else. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest, the kind of panic that only comes when you're losing control of everything you've worked so hard to build. Who? I finally managed to choke out. Who is this someone? Ava's eyes flickered briefly, but she didn't flinch. It's Chris, Ben's teacher. The name hit me like a blow to the chest. Chris, the charming, smooth-talking teacher I had always admired for his professionalism. The one who always had a friendly word for Ava. The one who had somehow wormed his way into the very life I had dedicated everything to. The anger, the confusion, the hurt, all of it hit me in a wave. I could hardly breathe. Ben. I barely managed to whisper. Where's Ben? What have you told him? As if on cue, I heard small feet padding across the hallway. I turned to see my son standing there, his wide eyes filled with confusion and fear. Ben. My little boy. Daddy? His voice trembled as he clutched his stuffed bear to his chest, his favorite from a trip we took last summer. The sight of him, standing there in his pajamas, looking so small, so innocent, tore at my heart. Ava moved past me, crouching down to Ben's level. She smiled at him, but it was a hollow, practiced smile. Sweetie, remember what we talked about, she said softly, brushing his hair back. It's time to say goodbye to Daddy. We're going on an adventure with Mr. Chris, and soon, You'll have a new daddy who will be there for you all the time." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I felt like I was being suffocated by the weight of her words. Ben's lip trembled, his eyes welling with tears. "I don't want a new daddy," he whispered. "I want my daddy." I had never heard him speak with such vulnerability, such pain. It shattered me. But before I could say anything, I heard the sound of tires on gravel, the unmistakable sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Ava stood up and turned towards the door. "That's Chris," she said, almost mechanically, as if this was just a normal part of the day. "We need to go." And just like that, she was gone. With my son. With my family. Everything I had worked so hard for. I followed them, moving through the house like I was in a daze. I stepped onto the porch just in time to see a sleek black car pull into the driveway, its headlights casting long shadows across the yard. Chris sat behind the wheel, his face impassive, his eyes not meeting mine. Ava shoved Ben's suitcase into the trunk without a second glance. The car seemed like a foreign object, so smooth, so sleek, so different from the life we had built together. I felt my heart break with every passing second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight, but I was frozen. And then, Ben turned to look at me. His face was streaked with tears, his small hand pressing against the window. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice so small, so full of fear. I took a step forward, but Ava slammed the door shut before I could reach him. Without a word, she slid into the passenger seat. The car pulled away from the driveway, and I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move. The sound of the tires on the gravel faded, and all that was left was silence. The kind of silence that fills you with a deep, aching emptiness. The world had changed. In a matter of moments, everything I had known was gone. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one blending into the next in a haze of anger, betrayal, and the overwhelming sense of loss. I tried to tell myself that I would get through this. I had always been strong. I had saved lives countless times, pulled people from the brink of death. But this was different. This was a wound so deep, so raw, that no amount of training or experience could help me stitch it back together. I woke up each morning to an empty house. Ava's absence hung in the air like a cold, suffocating fog. The quiet was unbearable. I would stand in the kitchen, staring at the empty table where we used to sit together, laughing over breakfast, making plans for the day. Now, it was just me, alone. My reflection in the window stared back at me, but it didn't feel like me anymore. I didn't know who I was anymore. Ben wasn't there either. He wasn't there to run into my arms when I came home from work. He wasn't there to make me laugh with his childish innocence. The house felt hollow without him. I spent the first few days in a daze, going through the motions of life like a robot. I went to work, threw myself into the chaos of emergency calls and life-or-death decisions, trying to drown out the gnawing pain in my chest. But no matter how much I threw myself into my job, the reality of what had happened wouldn't leave me. It was only when I sat down at the kitchen table one evening, the silence pressing in from all sides, that it hit me hard. Ava was gone, and she had taken Ben with her. She had left me for Chris. My mind kept returning to that name. Chris. The man who had stolen everything from me. The man who had taken my wife, my family, and now, my son. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. The sound of the dial tone felt like an eternity, but then it went to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaky, trying to keep it together. "Ava, please. We need to talk. I need to understand what happened. I need to know why. You owe me that much." But she never called back. She never responded. The silence from her was worse than anything else. The emptiness that had once been my home now echoed with the absence of her voice, her presence. A few days later, I received the first bombshell. It came in the form of a letter from the bank. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting the usual bills and notifications. But instead, I was hit with something far worse. The account. Our joint account. The one we had used for everything. Our mortgage, our bills, our savings for Ben's future, was empty. I blinked, rereading the statement over and over again. The account had been drained. Every last cent had been taken. I felt the blood rush to my head, my vision blurring. I slammed the letter down on the table, my hands shaking with rage. She had taken everything. Everything I had worked for. Everything we had built together. The house, the savings, the future I had dreamed of. Gone. In an instant. I sat there for hours, numb, my mind racing. I had trusted her. I had believed in her. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind? The thought of it gnawed at me. I had been so consumed with my work, so focused on saving other people, that I had missed the slow unraveling of my own life. I had missed the whispers behind my back, the glances between Ava and Chris. I had missed it all. I needed answers. I needed to know how deep this betrayal ran. That's when I decided to do something I had never thought I would. I called a lawyer. I had always thought that lawyers and legal battles were something for other people, something that only happened to the people on TV or in movies. But now, I was on the other side. Now, I was the one who needed help. I called Jack Turner, the lawyer who came highly recommended by a colleague. He was tough, ruthless, and had a reputation for getting things done. As I sat in his office a few days later, the weight of the situation hit me fully. I could feel my chest tightening, the pressure building. Jack leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him as he listened to the details. When I finished telling him everything, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me, his eyes cold and calculating. "You've been played, Max. I'm sorry, but that's the reality. She's taken you for everything she can get. And Chris? Well, I don't have to tell you what kind of man he is." I clenched my fists, the fury building inside me. I wanted to lash out. I wanted to hurt someone. I wanted to make them feel what I was feeling. "I'm going to make sure you get everything you deserve," Jack continued, his voice low. "We'll get the custody, the financial settlement, everything. But it won't be easy. And it won't be quick." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I could hold on for that long. My whole world had been ripped apart. I didn't know how I could keep going like this, but I had no choice. I had to fight. For Ben. For everything I had lost. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, phone calls, and planning. Jack had a plan. He would use every tool at his disposal to tear Ava and Chris apart. He promised me that he would expose their lies, their manipulation, and their deceit. But as the days passed, I started to wonder if this was the right path. I was becoming obsessed. Every waking moment was consumed with thoughts of revenge. Every phone call, every piece of evidence, every step of the plan. It was all driving me further away from the man I used to be. I used to be the one who saved people, the one who ran into burning buildings, the one who held people's hands as they took their last breath. I used to be the one who helped others rebuild their lives. But now, I was the one tearing everything apart. The anger in me was consuming me. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. All I could focus on was the destruction of Ava and Chris. It felt like the only way to get back at them, the only way to reclaim some of what I had lost. But deep down, a small part of me was starting to ask, what was this all for? Would it really bring me peace? Would it bring me back to the man I used to be? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that I had to keep going. I had to finish this. For Ben. For me. And for the man I used to be. The days after meeting with Jack Turner felt like a slow, grinding march through mud. I couldn't escape the suffocating weight of everything that had happened. Ava had taken Ben. She had left me for Chris, the man who had wormed his way into our lives like a disease, and now I was fighting a battle I didn't feel equipped for. But I had no choice. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my son. I threw myself into the legal process with the same intensity that I gave to my job. There was no room for error, no time for weakness. I was laser-focused. Jack had set things in motion. He was preparing a strategy to get custody of Ben, but it was going to take time. But the more I got involved, the more I realized how deep this betrayal went. It wasn't just that Ava had left me. It wasn't just that she had taken everything from me. My home, my family, my life. No, this was about something much darker. It was about power. It was about control. Ava was running away with my son, and I was powerless to stop it. I started researching Chris, and what I found shook me to my core. He wasn't just some nice guy teacher who had been kind to my son. No, he had a long history of manipulating women. He had a reputation at the school for being charming, for preying on vulnerable mothers. And Ava had fallen for it. She had fallen for everything he said, everything he promised her. I didn't want to believe it at first. I didn't want to think that the woman I had loved, the mother of my child, could be so easily manipulated. But the evidence was there. I had to face it. I had to face the fact that Ava wasn't the person I thought she was. And Chris? He wasn't just some guy who had taken advantage of my wife. No, he had been carefully plotting, waiting for the right moment to pounce. He was a predator, and I was his prey. The anger I had been feeling started to turn into something else, a cold, calculated fury. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let them get away with it. I had to fight for Ben. I met with Jack again a few days later, my mind racing with the plans I had begun to form. He listened quietly as I laid out my thoughts, my fears, and my growing need for revenge. Jack didn't stop me. He didn't tell me to calm down. He just listened, nodding occasionally, his eyes hard and unreadable. "When you're ready to move forward," Jack said finally, his voice low, "we'll take the gloves off. We'll hit them where it hurts." And that's exactly what I wanted. I had spent years protecting people, running into burning buildings, saving lives, putting myself in harm's way. But now, I wasn't saving anyone. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't fighting for anyone else. I was fighting for me, fighting for Ben. The next few weeks were a blur. I continued working, but it felt like a hollow routine. I wasn't there for anyone anymore. I was obsessed. Every free moment was consumed by thoughts of Ava and Chris. I couldn't escape it. It was all-consuming. And then, one day, the phone call came. "Max," Jack said, his voice urgent. "We've got something." My heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "We've got surveillance footage of Chris," Jack continued. "And it's not good. He's been meeting with women. We have proof he's been having affairs with other mothers at the school. And we've got a witness, a woman who's ready to testify against him. She says he's done this before. He's been targeting vulnerable women, taking advantage of them, and then moving on to the next one when they get too attached." I felt a cold thrill run through me. Finally, I had something. Finally, I could expose Chris for the fraud he was. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. "We'll use this," Jack said, his voice firm. "This will ruin his reputation, and we can use it in the custody battle. No judge is going to want to give Ben to a woman who's running off with a man like that." I felt a sick satisfaction in my chest, but there was something else, too. Guilt. A small voice in the back of my mind told me I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I had always been the protector, the savior. Now, I was using the very same methods of destruction that I had always fought against. But I shoved the thought away. I couldn't think about that. Not now. The next step was to get everything on record. Jack and I worked tirelessly to gather as much information as we could. We had Chris's past, his history with women, his manipulations, his lies. But there was still more to do. I had to break Ava. I had to make her realize the mess she had gotten herself into. I started looking into their finances. I checked bank statements, credit card bills, anything I could find that would tie Chris and Ava together financially. And then, I found it. There were large withdrawals from our joint account, withdrawals that I had never approved. Money had been siphoned off, hidden away. Ava had been taking money from the account even before she left me. I couldn't believe it. It was like a gut punch. She hadn't just run away. She hadn't just taken my son. She had stolen from me. I took the information to Jack. "This is it," he said, a wicked smile crossing his face. "This is how we finish this." We filed for divorce, citing financial misconduct and adultery. We filed for full custody of Ben. We made sure to emphasize Chris's criminal past, his history of manipulating women. We were taking no prisoners. I began to feel like a man on a mission. I was no longer just fighting for Ben. I was fighting for justice, for the truth. I wasn't going to let Ava and Chris win. I wasn't going to let them destroy my family. But as I watched the legal process unfold, as I prepared for the upcoming court hearings, I started to feel something inside me shift. This fight, this war, it was consuming me. The anger, the rage. It was all I could think about. I had lost myself in it, and I wasn't sure how to find my way back. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stop now. I had come too far. Ava and Chris had made their choices, and now they had to face the consequences. The tension in the air was suffocating. Every day felt like a new battlefield, each legal document, each conversation with Jack, a step closer to a war I didn't want but couldn't avoid. As the days dragged on, I began to lose track of time. I was no longer the man I had once been. The anger that had consumed me at first now simmered beneath the surface, a cold, calculated fury that drove me to get things done, no matter the cost. Jack had a plan, a ruthless plan. It was clear that Ava and Chris thought they were untouchable, that they could waltz away from this mess and build a new life without consequences. But they had underestimated me, and they had underestimated Jack. "Max, it's time to take the gloves off," Jack said one day, his voice low and full of purpose. "We're going to bury them." I nodded, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. I was no longer just fighting for custody of Ben. I was fighting for my own redemption, for my own sense of justice, and for everything they had taken from me. The first move was to start the smear campaign. Jack had all the tools he needed, evidence of Chris's past, his multiple affairs, and his manipulation of vulnerable women. It wasn't just about discrediting Chris anymore. It was about exposing everything, about making Ava and Chris feel the weight of their decisions. "We're going to make sure the community knows who Chris really is," Jack said. "We'll leak the evidence, through the right channels, of course. The school board will never be able to ignore this." I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. Chris's perfect image was about to come crashing down. The thought of him losing everything, the job, the reputation, the trust he had built with those families, felt like a small victory. Jack and I worked tirelessly, gathering every bit of evidence we could find. We contacted the women Chris had been involved with, convincing them to speak out. They were afraid at first, afraid of the backlash, but Jack had a way of convincing people to come forward. It wasn't about sympathy anymore. It was about power. And with the right leverage, we had plenty of it. But as the smear campaign took shape, something inside me began to shift. I wasn't just punishing Chris anymore. I was punishing Ava. I was punishing her for leaving me, for betraying me, for tearing our family apart. The more I learned about her decisions, the more I realized just how deep her betrayal had gone. She had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. She had been lying to me, deceiving me, and now I was going to make her feel every bit of the pain she had caused me. The financial documents Jack had uncovered were damning. Large withdrawals from our joint account, money that had been siphoned off and hidden away, transactions that were never authorized. I began to realize the depth of the betrayal. Ava hadn't just run off with Chris. She had stolen from me. She had stolen from Ben. And she wasn't going to get away with it. The divorce papers were filed. Full custody of Ben was demanded. Every piece of evidence we had was carefully compiled into a devastating case against her. The financial misconduct, the affairs, the lies. Everything was laid out in front of the court, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Ava had her own lawyer, and they would fight dirty. She was going to try and paint me as the absentee father, the workaholic who had no time for his family. But I had a secret weapon. I was a paramedic. I had saved countless lives, seen death in all its forms. I had sacrificed my time, my energy, and my sanity to help others. But I had also given everything to my family. I had been there for Ben, even when it meant missing important moments in his life. And now, I was going to make sure the court saw that. I started gathering character references. I reached out to colleagues, to the chief of my unit. I even spoke to the families of the people I had saved over the years. They knew who I was. They knew what kind of man I was. They knew I had been there when it mattered. I wasn't going to let Ava turn the narrative against me. I wasn't going to let her paint me as the villain. I had been the one who had been there for Ben. I had been the one who had worked tirelessly to provide for him, to keep him safe, to love him. And I was going to fight for him now. The days leading up to the custody hearing felt like an eternity. I was a man on a mission, a man who had nothing left to lose. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ava's face, cold and distant. Every time I thought of Chris, I felt a surge of hatred. I couldn't believe what they had done to me, what they had done to Ben. And then, the day came. I walked into the courtroom, my head held high, my heart pounding in my chest. Jack was beside me, his face set in a mask of determination. We had everything we needed. All we had to do was lay it all out. Expose the lies, the manipulation, the theft. The judge walked in, and the room fell silent. I sat down at the table, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. This was it. This was the battle I had been preparing for. Ava entered the courtroom, her eyes scanning the room before they landed on me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret, a flicker of the woman I had once loved. But then it was gone. Her face hardened, and she took her seat. Chris was next. He strutted into the room like he owned the place, his confident smile faltering the moment he saw me. He knew. He knew what was coming. The hearing began. Jack presented our case, each piece of evidence meticulously laid out. The financial misconduct, the affairs, the witness testimonies, the character references. I could feel the momentum shifting in our favor. Ava and Chris tried to fight back, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no going back. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall, my voice steady. I may not have been perfect, I began, my eyes never leaving Ava's. But I have always been there for Ben. I have always put him first, and I will continue to do so. I don't care what it takes. I will fight for him. Ava's eyes flickered with something. Guilt, maybe, or fear. I didn't care. The damage had already been done. And when the judge spoke, it was like a weight was lifted from my chest. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, her voice firm, I am awarding full custody of Benjamin Mitchell to Mr. Max Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell will have supervised visitation rights to be determined at a later date. The gavel came down, and I felt a surge of victory, of relief, of everything I had worked for finally coming to fruition. But as I walked out of the courtroom, Ben's face in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle wasn't truly over. The war had been won, but the real healing was just beginning. The courtroom had barely cleared when I stepped outside into the bright sunlight. The victory felt hollow. I had won, full custody of Ben, but it wasn't the win that weighed on me. It was the aftermath, the emptiness of it all. Ava and Chris were done. For now, at least. But it felt like a small, unsatisfying revenge. And in a way, it felt wrong. I got in my car, staring blankly at the road ahead. The victory had come at a price, and I wasn't sure it was worth it. Sure, I had been. I had won that battle. But Ava, the woman I had loved, the mother of my son, was gone. And no amount of paperwork or court hearings could bring her back. The house felt empty without her, and the echoes of the past haunted every corner. I drove home in a daze. Ben was at the kitchen table, drawing quietly, the weight of everything too much for him to fully understand. He still missed his mother. The look in his eyes whenever we passed a place we used to visit together tore me apart. Daddy, when can I see Mommy again? He asked, his voice small, as he colored in a drawing. My heart clenched. I had been prepared for this question, but hearing it still hurt more than I expected. We'll figure it out, buddy, I said, forcing a smile. But right now, it's just you and me. He nodded, a sense of understanding in his eyes. I didn't know if he really understood or if he was just trying to make me feel better, but I appreciated it. The silence in the house was deafening. It was no longer just the absence of Ava. It was everything she had left behind. The plans, the dreams we had shared, gone. I walked into the living room, noticing the space where our family photos once hung. The place was still familiar, but it felt different. Empty. I sat down on the couch, my fingers tracing the fabric of the cushions, feeling the weight of the life that was once ours. I couldn't stay in this house forever. Not like this. But where would I go? I grabbed my phone and called Rachel, the only person who had been there through all of this. She was a friend. But there was a part of me that felt something more. I hadn't wanted to admit it, but after everything, the comfort she offered was undeniable. How did it go? Rachel asked, her voice soft but full of concern. I won, I said, though I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined. I got Ben. Full custody. But it doesn't feel like I thought it would. There was silence on the other end. I know it's hard, Max, but you're doing the right thing. You've got him, and that's what matters. I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. I don't know how to do this without Ava. Without everything. You don't have to do it alone, Rachel said. You've got Ben. And you've got me. We'll get through this. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. Rachel was right. Ben was my focus now. I couldn't keep looking back, couldn't keep fighting for a past that was gone. I had to look forward, at the future I was now building with him. The next few days passed in a blur. I settled into a new routine with Ben, finding solace in the small moments. We ate dinner together. We played games. We went to the park. The silence was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't just the absence of Ava. It was the start of something new, something I had to create. One night, as I tucked Ben into bed, he looked up at me, his small face full of uncertainty. Daddy, will Mommy be okay? I kissed his forehead, fighting back the lump in my throat. I think so, buddy, but we can't worry about that right now. We've got each other. He smiled weakly, snuggling into his blanket. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, more than anything, I whispered, standing up and walking out of his room. As I closed the door behind me, I let out a long breath. The past was still with me, but I had to leave it there. For Ben. For me. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch, staring out the window. The future was uncertain. But one thing was clear. I was going to protect Ben. I would rebuild, and this time, I would do it right. The next few weeks passed slowly, but every day brought new challenges. I had Ben with me now, but there were moments when the weight of what had happened would hit me all over again. The silence in the house was louder than I ever imagined, and each room felt like a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to keep. I had to move forward, but the past kept pulling me back. Ben seemed to adjust better than I had expected. He found comfort in the little things, our routine, the shared meals, the bedtime stories. He would ask about Ava from time to time, and I could see the sadness in his eyes, a sadness I couldn't fix. But all I could do was promise him that no matter what, I would always be there. One evening, after a long day of trying to make our new normal work, I sat down with Ben at the dinner table. He was drawing something, his little brow furrowed in concentration. I watched him for a moment, the weight of the responsibility I now carried weighing heavily on me. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was both mother and father to him. And somehow, I had to get this right. Daddy? Ben's voice broke through my thoughts. Do you think Mom will be okay? The question took me by surprise. It had been a while since he had asked about Ava. I paused, searching for the right words. I think she's trying to figure things out, I said softly. But you don't have to worry about that. You've got me, and we're going to be just fine. Ben nodded, though I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. He didn't understand the complexities of the situation, and I was thankful for that. He didn't need to. He needed stability. He needed love. And I was going to make sure he had that, no matter what. That night, after Ben had gone to bed, I found myself standing at the window, staring into the dark night. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know how long it would take to heal, how long it would take to feel whole again. But one thing was clear. I was no longer the man I was before. I had changed, and I would continue to change. For Ben. For the future we would build together.